Larry Feldman is probably the most amazing trainer that I've ever experienced in this business. I've been in the car business now for 35 years, and I've seen quite a few trainers, and a lot of them are pretty good. I mean, really, I get something out of all of them that I've seen, really. But Larry is in another class. I really mean that. His training is literally riveting. A little while back, I sat in on his first training that I ever sat in on. It was for new hires. I still remember, I'll never forget it. About 25 people in the room who'd never sold cars before. And he started to do his training. And after 2 hours, I was in the back of the room and I raised my hand meekly and Larry stopped what he was doing and said, yes. And I said, maybe we should take a break. And literally, I'll never forget it. All 25 people turned around, looked at me and went, well, okay. And they turned back to Larry. And Larry looked at me and go, okay. And he kept going.
All right. Hello there, this is Ian Nethercott with the famous AutoHub Show, now in season 6. And this is our famous one-on-one, what used to be called the ambush interview process that we did live at events before the show. And the reason we do the show is we do have individuals that A, demand more time, need it, but B, have a busy schedule and want to share some deep knowledge that maybe you couldn't get from the live shows on Monday, which are our general show, and then our fixed op show on Fridays. So we have a gentleman here with a lot of deep technological background and interest, Chris, and he's in a company called CloudX. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And his last name is coincidentally the same as a high school teacher of mine in Cosgrove, which is kind of interesting. But tell us more about CloudX and how you got into CloudX. And it looks like in your background, you've also done other things in terms of ZocDoc, and what else is here? Icon Office Solutions and Brookview Financial. So they have a deep background in finance. So tell us more about what CloudX is about, and you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, and thanks for having me. Appreciate being here, Ian. It's a pleasure. So, yeah, CloudX is really a digital process transformation provider for back office functions, primarily focused on accounts payable transformation. But we do serve some other areas. And so we got started in that maybe in 2011 or so. And so I'm one of the founders. There were several founders at the time, where we had a hypothesis that, mid-market companies were really wanting this kind of transformation, but didn't have maybe the financial resources like an enterprise company to go automate and kind of find operational efficiencies that larger companies did have budget for and like IT talent to go pull off. So we entered mid-market, working with manufacturing, industrial, healthcare clients, retail, distribution, and in around 2017, we segued over into automotive through a relationship with somebody who was kind of serving them in a document management capacity. So they were storing documents, but we actually set about transforming transactional documents. So in the context of like AP. In any organization, but especially in automotive, you're dealing with invoices, you're dealing with parts invoices, and obviously services, statements, vendor statement reconciliations, a real pain for most dealers, and then all kinds of other parts and receiving documents to support the inventory that's coming in to support your fixed ops. And so we cut our teeth there in 2017 and have been growing in the auto space, connected to lots of these different DMS over the last few years. But personally, how we got started was through some connections we had in the document management and the office equipment space. And so that was my time at Icon. And I started to work with a couple different folks there, got connected with an engineer named Danny Teklahamanat, who's our CEO and CTO now. And so, it all started kind of over looking to bring transformational solutions to companies other than just selling them, copier equipment, which was a little bit of a differentiated approach that we took and got us some success in competitive accounts. But actually, we took our business model to the leadership of that company, and they couldn't kind of wrap their head around it. So we said, look, we got to do something with this because the market's responding, but we're kind of being handcuffed here in terms of what we can bring to market. And so it was a bit of a risk at the time, but looking back, it was something that's been a great experience. So that's how we got started.
So why automotive? I know a lot of people get into the auto space and they're like,
Yeah, we had somebody who was doing some kind of consultative selling for us on kind of a contractor basis, and he had
Yeah.
a background in document management, and he was connected in with some stores and some groups out west, and we kind of stumbled onto automotive, but we're so grateful we did because we recognize it now as a really big kind of blue ocean opportunity for so many reasons. Number one, there's tons of transactions, right? Especially for franchise groups that have fixed ops and service and
Yeah.
shine shops and collision centers. All of these necessitate strong supplier relationships so you can serve your customers. But on the heels of that comes all the paperwork, and it's usually an afterthought in most dealerships. It's like we scale up by adding people, but that's really not an efficient way to grow your business, and it certainly doesn't set you up for economies of scale or kind of a shared services centralized back office, which the dealerships that are like gaining competitive advantage, that's what they're doing. The other thing is kind of the timing in the industry is that you have these DMSs that are, that's a whole different story, but like how they're making data within the DMS available via API. So it's really this kind of early adopter thing that we've seen, but now it's kind of becoming more mainstream where the data is available, and now it's like who has the desire to want to go optimize these overlooked areas of the dealership. And most people are focused on the top line growth, selling
Yeah.
cars, and obviously expanding service, but they leave money on the table by not looking at the back office. There's a lot you can pick up there as well. And so it was, again, kind of coincidental that we got into it, but we're grateful we did because the problems in this industry are the same, whether you're a single store, and they get more compounded the bigger you get. Like it'll actually impede your growth by not having a leaned out back office. And so that's where, players like CloudX come in.
Yeah, I mean, I actually interviewed a gentleman at NADA this year who I think he started in banking and then he got into auto, and I think he had a background in the boat business. And he says, if you think auto is like Luddite or slow moving, I go try and sell or buy boats or fix boats. He says those guys are like, they're out there cleaning boats and writing stuff on napkins. Like it's obsolete stuff. And I would argue the same with RVs or motorcycles or performance products, be it like off-road vehicles or that kind of thing. Even
Sure.
there's what is that? I saw a post today from a guy. I think they do like excavation equipment or something. And I was like,
Yep.
excavation equipment dealer. I thought that was kind of interesting. Like I guess like Caterpillar or whatever they're doing, but that was kind of interesting. But as you look at, say, the move forward as we went from, say, the old school days of Reynolds and Reynolds and the newer school days of, say, CDK, Tachyon, and others, as they've gotten more into cloud-based solutions, how do you see that, I guess, different opinions? I mean, I know we have people have opinions on Reynolds that they're not friendly with other people. They don't want access, whereas others
Yeah.
do. Like, how do you see the future of that ending up? I mean, coincidentally, we're doing a show on Monday on CRMs and finance, but at
Yeah.
the end of the day, like, how do you see that sort of coming to a head as the customer buying behavior changes?
Yeah, I mean, so first and foremost, the hardest thing for us is like educating the market as to what's possible, and I think it's because it's hard to gain attention, in this space because there's so many competing priorities. But what we found is that it's one of these industries where people are always want to know what the guy down the street is doing, right? So they have the 20 groups. They want to know, what their competition is doing and how they're improving because they don't want to be left behind. And that makes sense, and it's kind of neat because in other industries you don't really have that as much. It's a little bit more standalone. But with that said, the DMSs are kind of all over the place. Like so, you have some of the older players like Reynolds, and then you see these philosophies where some of them want to develop it, white label the solution, and embed it into their platform. And it could be like 7 out of 10 or 6 out of 10 in terms of impact. But a lot of times, the third party players, the ones that have deep kind of process knowledge and the flexibility or entrepreneurial kind of spirit to go adapt and conform a solution that will really resonate in the space, do better. But what I've seen, and now we're connected to five. So we can, our first one was Dealer Track, so we're OpenTrack API certified. We had a Dealer Track group migrate over to Techion. So Techion's got a new kid on the block, a lot of buzz.
Yeah,
But building out this infrastructure as they kind of fly the plane, right, which is daunting.
yeah,
But to their credit, they've been phenomenal to work with in terms of making the APIs we work with malleable. And so we're not just, reading data, we're actually writing back into the DMS. So it's bi-directional exchange of information.
Right.
So they've been great. CDK has also been good to work with. Initially we tried to connect to CDK through what they call their PIPs. That didn't work, and so now we're moving through their Fortellis API, which is the whole direction of that platform, and so we're certified on Fortellis now. We just built to PBS up in Canada, so that's official, and then Dealer Bill also. And what we'll call this is kind of like the DMS like viability, the viability of the integration. But the thing is, we're talking about static data points across all these systems. So again, it's like educating the market to what's possible, educating the DMSs to what this means to their end customers, right, and why they should care. And I think they all have different kind of philosophies on that and ways they look to kind of monetize the data, right, and whose data is it, and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of all over the place in the industry. But my thought is like, if you build it, they'll come, right? Like, but some of them want to build it and deploy it themselves, and I think that's kind of a miss. That would kind of be Reynolds. I think for the people that are on that platform, there's other ways of going about it too. Like maybe you don't do a straight API, maybe you exchange data via file interchange, and that can be actually really reliable too, and offer you some advantages from a solution standpoint. But yeah, I think in the long run, like all the data is going to need to be available, or people are going to leave your platform. Like if you don't make it easy to get data in and out, I don't see why they're sticking around. Because this is just back office, and I know there's so many other things within a dealership, but I think the premise holds true that if the data is not available, like why would you stay on it unless they just undercut everybody on a renewal or something like that, which is kind of what I think happens.
And what about like working with the lenders, like the bank or the bank portals, or working with the OEMs and their captive lenders, or obviously working with accounting and other departments, inventory and that kind of stuff, whether it be parts, sales, service, body shop, whatever.
Yeah. So we don't get involved in individual banking relationships all that much. What we have are partnerships with integrated payments partners. So when we talk about AP transformation, we're talking about from the time an invoice comes in and presents in your dealership, right? Converting that document to data for you, irrespective of how the document looks, whether it's like a nice, electronic PDF that's been created, or a document that's been scanned, or even a handwritten, multi-part form, because you still have a lot of like mom and pop suppliers, like glass guys and dead guys that are scribbling out receipts, and they're never going to change, right? That's just how they're going to do it. So dealerships have to deal with that. So we have the solution to kind of convert all of those within, a defined SLA. And then that data is available in our system. They do the adjudications, the GL coding of it, any kind of a PO match. So we're interacting with the inventory data from the DMS, not just the invoice data we're capturing. And then that gets married up and pushed back into the DMS once these transactions are approved. And some of those can even be automated for like straight through processing, no intervention, no human touches on it, which is really kind of cool. The takeaway there from a value prop standpoint is like probably able to free up your staff like 60 to 70% of their time. Wow. And that gets into, all right, so what do they do then? Well, that's a good question. Like, what else do you want them to do? Do you want them to grind it out on data entry, or focus on things that are a little more impactful to your group? And also, like, it gets back to, do you want a person doing this in every store, or do you want to centralize that operation so you have like that economy of scale and efficiency where you now have centralized it, but you can communicate to your franchises? So there's a lot of things that kind of unfold, but the question was about, banks. And then that's the front end of the AP process I've been talking about. The back end is, okay, now how do we pay vendors, right?
Right.
And so this is interesting because you see a whole range of things in dealerships, but in a kind of typical, what we'll call manual environment, you've got generally like an owner card, like a single credit card that the owner loves to get their points on. It's a lot of times, an Amex, and they love those Amex points, and rightly so. Like they get all the perks from it, so that's cool. But then that is not necessarily the most secure thing to have out there, because you have one card that's going out to AR departments for all your vendors, and maybe there's 2 or 3 people that have personal access to card data. It's like a prime opportunity for fraud, and that happens. So The second and third pieces would be, defaulting them to check and ACH, which is kind of where most DMSs stop with what's native
Right.
to the DMS platform. And so there's a gap there where we partner with integrated payments providers like Repay in particular, who has some chops in this space and is a publicly traded company out of Georgia, but really understands the auto space. They then offer this integrated payments method where they do what's called real-time vendor enablement. And that basically means they optimize your entire vendor list, right? And they can do this outside of who you're funneling through that owner card. If you want to go after other opportunities, you want to keep those on the owner card because we understand the owners want their points,
Yeah.
as we established. But they'll ask the vendors, like, hey, would you want a virtual MasterCard, single use credit card that's pre-funded for an exact amount? And that can fund one invoice or a batch of invoices to the vendor. Alternatively, they can default them to ACH. And if they don't want either of those, they can do a check, print, and mail as a service. So basically becomes payments as a service, but it's fully connected to the AP platform I was mentioning to you, which we call AP Smart. So they can invoke the payments from an AP Smart, all of those kind of bespoke offering happens. And then as that payment data gets spooled up, like the card numbers get created, the checks get cut, all of that data now, those transactions attach themselves back to the invoice. So you have like a total audit trail on the entirety of the thing, on the entirety of the process. And so the derivative benefit is that for the dealers now, for anything they're paying through card, they pick up cash rebate, and it's pretty sizable. Like it can generally be like typically 1% of their spend. So in effect, you've automated the process end to end, or optimized it too, right? And now you get a bit of a profit center out of a back office cost center. It's like a totally radical like paradigm shift, but that's the reality of like a full kind of AP transformation. What's possible?
So it's a win-win versus I got your credit card, I'm going to run it in the back, kind of
Yeah,
lose-lose. Yeah, so I mean,
yeah,
you're obviously dealing with a lot of old school people in the dealership world, probably not the bigger dealership groups, but the smaller ones. I actually worked a
sure.
couple of years ago where their accountant was using their credit card for things. But anyway,
Yeah,
at the end of the day, what kind of cost savings can they expect, time savings, and more importantly, like what does it cost them? Like is the juice worth the squeeze, as they say in the car business, I guess, and other businesses?
yeah, yeah. I think that's a good question. So I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but at a minimum, in a purely manual environment, I would anticipate like time saving 60 to 70%, right? On average, it could be higher.
Yeah.
And so you'll never reduce in a dealership like below one AP person. Like you're always going to need somebody to handle exceptions and do those things. But now what their day looks like is different. So you can stack them with other kind of higher order activities. And actually, we find that leads to better employee engagement and retention, right? Because the most mundane aspects of the job are coming off of what the grind is, and the things that they want to get to they can't get to if they're under the cosh of like just this paper burden every day, and it starts over first of every month. You know what I mean? Um, so that'll scale, right? Obviously, if you have a larger group, you can repurpose people and those kinds of things too, though we don't really advocate that. How someone manages their organization's up to them. I think what generally happens is people fill other holes in their organization and free up talent to do other things. That's more the case. The other thing we've seen is succession management, because it's harder and harder to find quality people and competent people, especially in this back office. Like some people may understand accounting, but they may not understand dealership accounting. So it's hard to find that talent. And when someone leaves, it generally leaves a hole. So one of the nice things about an automation platform is that with the workflows and the business rules piece, where you can kind of force things to travel through like an escalation process or a automatic routing to the right, departmental manager or GM or whatever, you mitigate some of that succession management constraint, right? So there's like lots of kind of other pickups, and then I think one of the other things would be like uh, how people collaborate, like from a central accounting office to, let's say, stores, and maybe they're in a geography where they're across 60, 70 miles, they've got 10, 12 stores in there. Now you have the ability to collaborate with your departmental managers, your GMs in those environments in a way where any change of data status or custody, including like internal comments, is all appended into the transaction. So what it ushers in is a whole new kind of era of visibility and accountability. So it's a lot harder for people who are doing shady things to like get away with that, and we've seen that too, where fraud, internal payables fraud gets snuffed out. People are trying to pass, personal costs on fixes to their cars through the business. Like it all comes out in the wash because now there's nowhere to hide from it, right?
Yeah.
So those would be some of the kind of the anticipated gains. Now, in terms of cost, the way we look at it is we're transactionally costed. So it's typically a price per document, right? And that can range with economies of scale and pricing kind of tiered based on volume bands. So like the enterprise groups or like the 10, 20, 30, 40 store groups and up will get a little bit of a break because they're moving a much higher volume, right?
Yeah.
But for the small stores that are single, one or two stores, we'll generally move to like a fixed fee model where we bake in kind of an average number of transactions for them per month. And so one of the things in our approach, not to go on and on, but it's we'll do a benchmark assessment for them. So we'll look at like 15, 20 data points and say, all right, what is your process costing you today? And in this whole space, there's something called CPI. So cost to process an invoice. And this is like studied out by analyst organizations every year. They kind of refresh and they'll say, okay, top 10 or 20% of the market that's automated, spent money on technologies to do this can process an invoice for, $4 from the time it comes in to posting. The laggards, the bottom 20% will do it over 15, right? Maybe they're using couriers to ship it from location to location. They're inefficient. In the middle of the road will be like $6 or $7. And there's tons of groups that do that. Level Research, IOFM, like tons of groups. Yeah. So we'll help them kind of gain context for what it's costing them. And a lot of them have never even really thought about it or studied it out. And then you look at, okay, what is the impact that 70% time savings upon my process look like? What does that deliver back in terms of time saved? And then what are the other kind of ancillary benefits? And then the second thing we'll layer in is like, what is the projected monetization component? If we go all the way and we pursue the payments, like what is that going to contribute in cash? And then, so you start to look at the saving side and the monetization. In almost every case, the monetization piece funds the invoice processing piece in its entirety. So in effect, you get like a fully automated process and a check back too. It's just like, does someone have the desire to like go after it, right? And that's really where the rubber meets the road, because some companies are just, well, status quo, it is what it is, and then that's it, and they don't want to turn attention to it. But more, I think, are looking for, hey, we got to modernize, because they'll have a fraud issue, they have something that is like cataclysmic that causes them to say, geez, man, this can't go on this way. That's what we find too.
So if someone wanted to do this and obviously pay for itself or possibly save some money, save some staffing costs maybe, what does it look like start to finish? I mean, do you start with the assessment and then you go into integration? Like, how does that look like? Like, for me to get that done?
Yeah, I mean, in our process, so we'll do that.
There will be details below about the company, just so you know. Go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so we'll do that. We obviously understand, especially for somebody who's moving out of a purely manual environment, it's kind of like the Starship Enterprise here that we're talking about, Star Wars kind of stuff. So we get into product demos, and what's great is we can look at some live, data in a live, DMS type environment, so you can actually see the types of transactions you're working with. You can see how that PO data pulls in, how you can adjust it within AP Smart, push it back to the DMS, auto match. Like, it gets contextualized. Like, it's always fun to get on these demos, because like within 20 minutes, 30 minutes, people like, oh wow, that's cool. Oh, that's great. Like, especially like vendor statement rec, which this is kind of just an out there comment, but it's like, auto is the only industry in 14 years we've been doing this that pays from statement that we've seen. And, we're in lots of other industries, and a lot of companies do a statement rec process, but it's really just to keep score. But the invoice is what drives the payment, right? But in auto, it's almost the opposite, right? So you do pay some from invoices, but it's like every month they got to, break down these complex documents, these statements. Every line on that statement is an invoice that's already been received and processed, right? Or posted. And someone has to go through line by line with a little highlighter and figure out, okay, this is paid. No, we don't have that one. That's a balance for it. This is a credit. Like, I've seen statements as long as 20 pages with like 20 lines a page. And somebody's got to break this down every month. It's like, it's madness. So that's something we do that's a huge time saver, where we can relate that statement to all the invoices in the system, and we can narrow down that 400 line item list to 10 that are the outliers. Like, these 10 are listed on the statement, but there's no matching document for it. So now geez, I got to go to the vendor and ask for these right before we can
Right.
pay this thing in full. So yeah, sorry, I know that's a little bit sidebar from what you're asking, but
So month then becomes a little bit easier. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, it's just, again, it's the quality of life, the visibility, and that's how we see it. But what I'm always amazed by is, like, they say, forgive this expression, but like, beauty is in the eye of the beer holder, right? You've heard
Yeah.
that. It's kind of the same way when you talk to the controllers and the CFOs. Like, what is it about the system that was most impactful? And I'm expecting to hear, the efficiency, the this, the that, visibility, just being able to search things, to see the audit trail, to see the interactions, to query reports, by store, by GL, by departments, so I can do accrual forecasting, so I can do spend analysis. I can hit a button and see every approver in my company and what they're sitting on, so I can see where the bottlenecks are, who's not doing their job, or who I need to light a fire under. Like, this is what people get excited about. And then, I mentioned the thing with the fraud scenario. That was a real thing, for a group out in Omaha, and someone was trying to pass off like oil change, and through the way we do GL coding and the visibility of it, like, oh wow, they're actually trying to screw us here, so they're terminated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also, the last thing I'd say is, like, normalizing pricing across locations, like being able to see, you have one common vendor, but maybe they're charging you different prices in different stores. Like, when you can slice and dice all the data down, it's a whole different ballgame. And so this is the stuff, I think, that the CFOs, they were thinking, oh man, I'm going to be so excited, we're going to save time and this and that, but they picked up all these other intangibles, and it's like, man, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, and then when you look at it from a manufacturer standpoint, I think that's huge from transparency. I mean, I used to own a Porsche product, and it was funny. I had to get a service done on the car, and there were two franchises where I lived, plus an independent who serviced those cars. I like, because they also sold them used.
Yep.
And the disparity in the price between just the two Porsche franchises was insanity. I was like, how can you have two cars within a 15-minute drive that were
Yep.
that different? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all to me. I was like, wow, like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, I was just watching a video last night, and it was on YouTube, and the guy was saying, he's looking at a Bugatti, and he was looking at an air mass sensor. He pulls it out, it's a Bosch part, and then he's like, oh, this is compatible with like a VW GTI. That one's $120, and the one for Bugatti is $4,500. It's the same part. It's like, that's madness, man.
Well, there's a guy, I don't know if you've seen the guy on YouTube, but he buys like wrecked or destroyed or cheap high-end cars, and then he fixes them or tries to. It's actually a pretty good channel. But he did this, I think it was like an Audi that he bought. It was like an old race car that like people pay to race. And he bought like the cheapest one they had, and he was like trying to figure out that the parts from all these different cars are similar, but he was trying to figure out which one he could get away with. I mean, he found out a lot about sort of the, like some parts were this, but modified, and some were the same. And then he had to get, like parts that would work on a Ferrari that would also work on this Lamborghini. And it was kind of interesting, just the layers. But the thing that was interesting to me from the strictly, because I used to work for the OEM years ago now, is if I'm an OEM rep, say in Greater Nashville, and I'm going after, say, 20 stores that I talk to every month, and I got 4 groups that own most of them, and the same group has 3 stores with the same brand that aren't in line, like, that's crazy. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I mean, it just seemed crazy to me, but the thing that was funny when I worked for the OEM was there's a big group out of Edmonton. I think they have 45 stores. They have some in the U.S. And when I went there, and I was working with multiple departments, including finance, and the other stores in market would always complain. They'd be like, well, how come you're not funding this? It's like, you just don't work as hard as they do. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, it's just a relentless, dude. Like, we're going to fund the guy who does the work. Like, we're not going to, like, we don't care. Like, they meet the criteria, they get funded, right? Like, we don't really care what the brand of store is. We just, you got to do these things, and it's kind of like accounting. The accountants, they got to work with a set of rules, and it's not like the rules are optional. They're not.
Right.
So I think that
Yep.
sometimes the car guys, being the creative thinkers that they are, get creative
Yeah.
with accounting, but that's not a recipe for success. It's a recipe for
Yeah.
disaster, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah, we're just talking about the straightforward stuff. I mean,
yeah,
there's so many other things they do in these departments, and so it's overlooked by a lot. Like you've got the warranty claim,
yeah.
process, that's a disaster. You've got
Parts,
credit card
inventory.
statement, yeah, parts, inventory. Like it's a lot. So I think just taking some of that stuff off the plate, it's as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. You gotta be intentional. Like I think we were talking about this earlier. Was just nothing happens by accident. Like you have to have
Yeah,
intention to go transform something, and it will take rolling up your sleeves a little bit. But one thing I wanted to mention was just like how long does it take to do this, right? And I would answer that kind of two ways. And sorry, I'm asking my own
yeah,
questions, but
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
but I think people do want to know, like, to your point about is the juice worth the squeeze? Economically, sure. And then from counting the cost, like, what's it going to take to do it in my one or two stores? Well, with like a known DMS, we can do that, inside of 4 to 6 weeks. And your processes change, forever for the better,
Yeah,
right? So it's kind of like peeling the band aid off and getting
yeah,
after it. Um, in larger groups, obviously, you have to work through it on a store by store, region by region kind of basis, right? You
yeah.
establish maybe a 2 to 4 store pilot, and then from there, you just keep bolting on stores until the whole thing is kind of worked through. So the front end process of AP is a little harder to transform because there's more workflow and like um, kind of singular events that can be accounted for, like exceptions that have to be handled and ways of
Right,
treating things. Payments are a little bit more universal, and there's one integration point. It's like updating payment status in the DMS. With the invoice processing, the front end, you have the vendor master file you have to interact with, the chart of accounts, the GL codes, the purchase
right.
order, and the receipt data. So there's four. So that's where the customizations, take a little more time. But just again to follow that flow, like 4 to 6 weeks first couple stores, 2 to 4 weeks for ensuing stores. So you could obviously accelerate that if you're pretty well organized. But if you're moving from purely manual, it's like, okay, what do we want to change? Like, and it's an opportunity to kind of reimagine. Like, just because we've done it this way, does it make sense to continue to do it that way? And I don't mean the technological approach. I mean, what kind of business rules do you want to govern the process, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of thought work that the dealers have to do, and obviously we try to help with that and conform to really how they want to do it. But the payments can change in as fast as like 2 weeks. Like they could flip a switch and it's done for you because there's less moving parts. Um, and it can be done simultaneously, like these two
Yeah,
tracks.
yeah.
You could do the payments before the invoices. You could do the invoices before the payments. Like you kind of see lots of different kind of modular approaches you can take. So there's really kind of a custom cut for most dealers that will work.
And it looks like you also work like in healthcare and manufacturing and other things. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, it's not a problem at scale. So if I'm like, say, Lithia or Sonic or what's the one? Lookers, I think is the UK based one, or
yeah,
I don't know, Auto Canada or Penske. That doesn't matter, right? You can handle those numbers of
yeah.
transactions.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're a SOC 2 certified company, which is good. Just that's for Sarbanes-Oxley
Yeah,
compliance, but that's also a ticket to ride in enterprise, publicly traded companies. So we serve some very, very large enterprise clients outside of auto, right? Um, but yeah, we'll absolutely scale as your organization does, or if you're acquiring, divesting, like absolutely. And I think one other thing to consider too kind of ties back to the question about the DMSs and how to do things. Some of them, as I said, they'll get you like a 6 out of 10 transformation, but they leave you doing either managing like not just new workflow tech, but new like OCR, optical character
yeah, yeah,
recognition, which is kind of an oddball thing to do.
yeah.
From our perspective, we want to come and deliver a transformation, right? And so that's kind of a fundamental difference. There's this like BPO element that's baked into our process, right? Because we want to just help you focus on what you're good at. We're good at converting documents to data and then structuring the system so it's functioning how you want it to function, right? But I think in some of these other scenarios, you're almost like left in this hybrid spot where you're still having to like audit, data entry, which is not what most people want. They want to be done with that and focus on the higher order stuff. But yeah,
So not like Bruce Almighty. You don't want to be doing that. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
So
5,000 emails a minute, right?
yeah, like yeah, I got more to do. So thanks for taking the time and sharing this with the dealer body, who obviously needs to optimize, like every government seems to be looking at these days.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, you
Sure.
want to audit stuff, you want to make sure it does properly, you want to look at economies of scale, and obviously, having less headcount doing stuff that's manual if you can. So, how do
Yep.
you see AI helping here? I mean, there's a lot of this year at NADA, there was a lot of people saying, well, it's AI, but it's not. But, how do you
Yeah.
see that moving forward?
Yeah.
Because I know it's a big topic.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because, as I mentioned, we have a couple methodologies we use in the capture process. So for what we'll call like machine generated, like think of a nice formatted PDF, like easy to
Yeah.
capture, and there's what's called OCR, optical character
Yeah.
recognition, which is kind of in some ways like some of the first AI. It's not generative AI, but it uses layout and learning methodology to convert semi-structured or structured data off a page and then interpret kind of the results next to it.
Yeah.
So like it'll look for the word invoice number, invoice NO, invoice hashtag, INVNO, like all these permutations and associate the data field with
Yeah.
it next to it as the invoice number. So that's been around for a while. There's also elements of like RPA that we deal in, but since we have access to the API data, like we don't have to do as much RPA to post data back to DMSs, but that actually can synthesize like data entry. Where we see AI going in the context of accounting, and it's something we have in our development path, is to basically do predictive GL coding, right? So we can look at a transaction, see how you've coded it. And we can already do this where we default things that you can
Yeah.
set, programmatically or ad hoc. But we want to look at a historical trend because we have that data and then make a suggestion. Would you like it coded this way, right? A little more tricky to do on the PO side because there's way more that can go sideways on a PO transaction. Maybe someone
Right.
books the PO wrong, it's not received fully, the invoice comes in wrong. Like that will probably always require, and that's why I'm saying you'll never distill down below like one AP person. Someone's got to, roll up their sleeves and deal with the exceptions. But on the non-PO side, where you can predict the type of way you want that coded, that stuff is definitely open for AI, no question about it. And so we'll have that built into our framework shortly.
So that would then help with predictable costing, potentially predicting that out over time based on uncertainty, which is kind of the new normal. That would help
Yeah,
them
yeah,
say,
sure.
hey, like if
Yeah.
costs were to go up X, Y, or Z, they could look at it and be very predictable.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is more so you could look at it from the costing standpoint, but also just the effort involved in the geocoding process. Like it's just more the machine can take on and less off your people's plate. Um, and then I think there'll be other ways you can use AI on the payment side of things to optimize that vendor enablement piece. Right
Yeah.
now, the payments partners we work with have domestic, call centers to support that vendor enablement piece. And I think there's probably some things you could do there to amplify that as well.
So, obviously looking at things like, maybe not negotiating with the vendor, but maybe over time, that's something that they could identify as, hey, these guys are charging you too much. You should have a conversation, like the fixed cost piece.
It could also be like agent support, like start to automate some of that when they're calling in to check on payment status or optimize the payment methodology or offer different things. You bring up an interesting point, which is really in automotive, it's almost unheard of, but like for most other industries, there's the whole concept of like early payment discount capture. And
Yep.
so it's not so much, I guess in some ways it's a negotiation, but in auto, it's like almost defeated because of this whole statement
Yeah.
predicate, like the way people are paying from statement. So it kills like the time incentive. But in other industries, people get competitive over that where they'll shave, 2%
Yeah.
off a bill if they can turn around in 10 days. But you really don't see it in auto. It'd be interesting. I've talked to a lot of controllers and CFOs in the last 6, 7 years, and there's only been like two or three that I can remember being like, man, we really need to do more of this. And I think they came from outside the industry.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see it change too, but I don't know that it will because of the way the statements are set up, and it's almost this lag to when
Yeah.
things get
It's not.
paid.
It's not kind of the "I'll make you a deal you can't refuse" thing, but I think, I mean, at the end of the day, if I've got a series of dealerships that have high fixed costs and I can basically prepay that, I think
Yep.
there's definitely some leverage to that manufacturer or parts
Yeah.
supplier. You know, the example I always use, I had the opportunity to work with an Audi store years ago, and they had invested in a multi-million-dollar parts distribution machine.
Hmm.
And this thing was crazy. So you put in what part you want, it'd search the inventory by itself, it would source the part, it would deploy the part up through a conveyor belt system, and then it would automatically source the oldest part in inventory for you.
Wow. Pretty cool.
And it did this like in maybe a minute or two. So it was like this massive machine that was like probably a couple stories tall, but basically it would just deploy the part. So you could basically look at parts inventory real time, pretty much, and optimize for age of part. So you could probably amortize that parts cost. I mean, I don't think it did things like tires, but you know, like this was an Audi store, so the parts were expensive, I'm assuming.
Oh, sure.
Being it's an Audi. But you know, at the end of the day, like it was interesting because you look at most parts departments that I've been in, it's like racks of stuff.
Yep.
What those are, I don't know. Do people order it? Don't know. Did they pick it up? Don't know. Yeah, we're just going to inventory that. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I even worked at a store in Los Angeles, and I remember the complaint from the service director was they weren't selling tires. So I remember talking to the service writers, and I said, "So do you have tires?" Go, "Oh no, we don't have any inventory." I said, "Well, what about these ones like in the drive that are bolted? Well, do you have the one, or is it like a set of four that one's bolted?" They're like, "Oh, we don't."
Yep.
So I went over to the parts director. I'm like, "Well, do you have just the one tire that you can't use because there's a screw through it, or do you have three other ones?" "Well, no, we don't have any tire inventory." And I said, "In Los Angeles, you have no tire inventory." He goes, "Yeah, we can get it though." And I'm like, "What do you mean you could get it? How long does that take?" He's like, 45 minutes. I'm like, "Really? Like, who's waiting 45 minutes for a set of tires?" Nobody. It was crazy. It was crazy. Yeah, I just didn't get it. And by the way, next week I'm doing a tire show just because that's a topic I've wanted to do for a while in fixed ops. Just because sell everyone tires. Just sneak peek, sell everyone tires. Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I imagine.
imagine.
You make money, sell the tires. Every single
it's
time.
got to be on a larger scale. It's like the razor blade model, man. I mean, people got to replace them. They're consumable, you know.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. I have a HP printer in my office.
Sure.
And I went to get a toner, and toners have gotten a little expensive, kind of like inkjets back in the day.
Sure,
and years ago, you bought a printer and they gave you a toner with it.
Yeah.
Well, Hewlett Packard has gotten smarter over the last, I don't know, 10 years since I bought a printer.
Yeah.
The toner is no longer included.
Yeah, of course.
So you get a good deal on the printer, but then you got to walk over to the other aisle and put the two and two together, and that isn't a good deal. So it's kind of funny.
So this brings a conversation full circle, Ian, because you asked how we got started in this thing. I told you, we were at we're at a national office equipment company, but we were operating in the Northeast region, and like, these guys really just wanted to sell the box that had the little green button, man. And like, they wanted to sell you the service contract on the box. Like they just could not imagine technology solutions like eliminating paper printing, which is comical, man, because it's like, geez,
like this stack of paper, company. Like this stack. Of paper. That's why I got a toner.
They just put, hey man, they'll send you the toner and they'll send you the tech to fix it when it breaks, and that's all they want to do. It's like, okay.
I remember when I was in the computer business selling the first Canon laser printer from Apple.
Oh, there you go.
And this thing loaded the toners. The toners loaded like bullets. There was like a big drum where you put them in and then they moved around.
Yeah.
And I think the printer, if memory serves me, was like $12,000 or something crazy.
I'm sure. Yeah, sure.
And today it's like, oh yeah, okay, the printer's like $500, but then the toners are like $300 a piece or whatever it is.
Yeah, if you ever look at it per ounce, you can find studies. In some cases, it's almost been as high as like gold per ounce. It's crazy, man. Toner is expensive, and I think that's why they want to sell you as much of it as they can. But I remember because Icon got acquired by Ricoh, you got this company that would do 22 billion. Ricoh did like 22 billion in revenue, and we were there. And they had like $1 billion in profit. I'm like, God, that's a terrible margin, man. This is stupid. If you sold more services, you can do way better. But I'm telling you, man, there's this just magnetic addiction to selling toner.
Well, think about inkjets. And I had an inkjet many years ago, Epson, I think. So I'm there at the Staples, I think it was. and they've got their new angle is big tanks of ink. I'm like, why would I want big tanks of ink? Oh, well, that way the cost of ink is less. I'm like, how much am I gonna print? Like, it's an office printer. Like, once in a blue moon, like I print something.
Oh man,
like almost never. And the one I have is, but the funny thing is, the last one I had, I think was an Epson. I don't know, brother maybe. And what they did is when they upgraded the software, when you upgraded your computer system software, it bricked the printer. Like it no longer worked. Like one day it worked, the next day it didn't work. And there was nothing changed other than the software. I thought that was hilarious. Anyway, thanks for taking the time today. If you have technical questions that I can't answer, probably can't answer them, obviously you can reach out below. And if you are looking to fix your process, optimize for your business, save money, and reduce staff overhead simultaneously, and maybe even walk away with some money, you should definitely look at CloudX. And if you're looking to simplify payment and maybe spot fraud, if that's correct, and not maybe give everyone your credit card to go on shopping trips, that's a great way to do it as well. And have yourself a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Appreciate your time, Ian. Have a great weekend.
No worries. Ciao.
Take care.